Chasing Safety. That was your introduction to Underoath, the world's introduction to Underoath as it would really come to be known, you know, what you would call a quote unquote classic lineup of a band. And this gets into actually something that I think is worth discussing for a second. There are so many bands where there is a particular lineup that is the one that is known. And in my mind, a lot of times those earlier incarnations really only are celebrated at all and sort of continue to be known because of the work of the later incarnation. And there's something about the often lazy way that facts are assembled, like on a Wikipedia page, when it's, you know, this happened and then this happened and then this happened and this happened. People coming in and out of bands seems more significant than like 4 years spent on tour, you know? So I feel like it gives people a really skewed perception of what lineup changes really mean in a band. Whereas, you know, if you think about, say, Metallica, my favorite band of all time, you know, there was Ron McGovney on bass. There was, you know, a couple different guys that played the lead on their first song on a compilation. There was Dave Mustaine was in the band for a while. Obviously, Cliff Burton's on the first 3 records. But when you think about Metallica, like, you have a pretty clear image of more or less the same lineup or lineup.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so it's just interesting that, you know, obviously there was an Underoath that existed before the one that we all know. And it's not to discredit that version or any of those people that were in it, but I don't know. I feel, you know, there's a lot of bands. There's Throwdown, Dillinger Escape Plan, Zayo. There's so many bands that I think we could throw in here. It's certainly not just Underoath.
Right.
Like you wouldn't even necessarily know or remember those early versions if the newer version we all love didn't, you know what I mean? Like carry out.
Exactly. Yeah.
So getting in the time machine, you're recruited into this band Underoath. You're going to make a record together.
We toured for a while first, which is another common misconception about that. Is there's 2 really big misconceptions about Not Only Chasing Safety. Be it that I'm the lead singer, it's always like it's my first record. But what gets brushed under the rug is it's half the band's first record.
Right.
Myself,
yes,
James Smith, and Grant Brandell, none of those people were a part of the record before.
Mm-hmm.
And it always gets put as Spencer Chamberlain's first record with the band, but it was a complete. There's 6 members in Underoath for anyone who doesn't know. It was 3 new members came in.
Yeah.
And we in some of those at different times over the touring cycle before, and we toured for, you know, we did a couple of tours before that record came out. We were touring nonstop, and I mean, I was in a band that was on Facebook. Jesus, man. You're like going nuts. Look at that guy.
Just trying to get on the camera, you know?
Dude.
Little cameo. Cameo.
So, I was on a band on Face Down, which was like a hardcore, metalcore type record label at the time, and we were based out of Tampa Bay as well. Even though I'm not originally from here, I had moved down here right after high school. I came, and because we were touring and stuff, and as soon as we finished, our guitar player, his family, and this was with my older brother and his friends. I was a singer, and his family lived here, even though they lived in North Carolina where I was from, until he graduated, when he was older. So then they moved back to Florida. And I was still in North Carolina for a while. And then we all picked up and moved down here because his father had a drywall company. And that meant we could tour, come back, and not lose our asses trying to, you know, because it was hard when you first started touring back then. You know, you had to, before the internet was the way, you know, like you had to tour and play music and impress people, and you wouldn't get paid a lot of money, and you know, you couldn't just survive. Like you couldn't just quit a job get a job for 2 weeks and quit it. So we moved to Florida because we could come home and literally work the next day.
Mm-hmm.
It sucked. Had to wake up at 6 a.m. and go do drywall. Like it was awful. But it allowed me to live my dream, and and I thought that was it. I thought this is what I was going to do. Like I get to do what I love, and then come home and I can still make some money. And we played some shows with Underoath, and they just kind of pulled me aside, and wanted me to be the singer. And I said no twice first before I did it. And not because I thought I was better than them. I thought it was a great opportunity, and it was honestly because I was in a band with my own blood. My brother was the drummer, and this is another story that a lot of people don't know. Is I remember we went out to lunch, and he sat me down and he goes, "I'm going to move back to North Carolina, and I think you should stay, and I think you should join Underoath."
Wow.
He's like you're the best at what you do, and his life, he wanted to do something else. And Phil, was in a lot of bands after, but I just think Florida wasn't for him at the time. He actually lives here now and has a wife and a kid here. Loves Florida probably more than I do.
But we're talking like almost 20 years ago right now. So yeah.
Well, not really, but yeah, a long time ago. And he, if it wasn't for him going like, yo, you definitely should do this. And I was like, are you sure? Because at first it was just going to fill in, they had a show or two, they didn't know what they were going to do. And I think after the first practice, it wasn't ever really talked about. It was just like, this is what you're going to do, we toured. I think we wrote in the first practice too, if I recall correctly. We were learning old songs for me, and then we wrote a song or two in the first practice.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think gets overlooked as well, especially as bands become older and more established and have a deeper catalog, that in this particular scene that the band originated in, and certainly the mindset at that time, it's constant forward motion. It wasn't a thought of like, okay, we've got these records and this is our band. It was always just like, what's next? What's the next thing? So
yeah,
I think a lot of people might be surprised to hear that you wrote new material your very first practice, but knowing kind of the mentality of the era, especially, it's not a surprise at all. In fact, it'd be kind of a surprise if you didn't.
Yeah. And like, dude, when we were touring, we were still playing for nobody, you know? Like it was like, it was really, there was a lot of shows that were really shitty. Like no one came, like it wasn't like, it wasn't overnight. We toured for a while, the six of us, before we went made Chasing Safety, and then we went on tour immediately as direct support to Norma Jean, who was crushing at the time, because Bless the Martyr was like just everything for anyone in that scene. And we were direct support on that tour. And then I remember me and Aaron flying back to finish some stuff on Chasing Safety. And at the end of the tour, we stayed to mix. Some people stayed to hear some of the mix, and then it came out after that. And it came out, we were on Warped Tour. And that Warped Tour, we were, no forklifts. We weren't on the blow up sign. We were on, at that time, Smart Punk stage was in the festival grounds, but for some reason, Kevin wouldn't put it on the blow up sign. I remember we had to fight to get, like, our management had to fight for us to have catering on the tour. They weren't even going to give it to us. And then we had to push our gear from wherever they parked our ride at, through the mud, through the rocks, through the rain, whatever, ourselves, no help, no matter if it was on a mile away or not. And then we would hit the line with a picture of Chasing Safety photograph, like the photograph on the back, I think, of us. And it said new record coming out, whatever day. And on the back, we would write Smart Punk stage at whatever the time was. And we'd pass it out to everyone in the line. Everyone in the band had to do it. And then you could go back to sleep and then wake up and play. But we did it every day. And I swear to God, half the people would take it and fucking throw it on the ground. You know what I mean? Like, they look at you and like, and then that it came out on that tour. And I mean, we were hustling like super hard, and people were showing up, and then word of mouth was spreading that it said that you should watch. And I mean, we even caused a riot in Atlanta, Georgia. They put us on this little makeshift stage, and it had like wooden barricades. And we tried to tell them, like, this isn't going to work. Atlanta was actually a place that we did well already because we were from the South. In the Solid State, the Norma Jean support show had gone off really well, and because that's where Norma Jean was from. And we were like, Atlanta's kind of like our second home. Like, this is going to be crazy. And it was like down this like hallway where the concessions were, the bathrooms, in this little stage. And believe it or not, everyone showed up, and it like pushed it, and the barricade fell. People were getting hurt. The security guards were turning our amps off. We ended up in handcuffs, and that's how we met Kevin Lyman. You know, it was like that's how he heard of us. And I think the next year we were on a legit stage. It wasn't main stage yet, but it was like the one tick below, you know. And then the year after that, we were a main stage band, you know. But pretty wild. I remember
incredible.
That.
I remember that Smart Punk stage thing of some other bands as well that were, especially the stories of pushing your gear all the way across like rocks.
It was us and the Bled and the Matches and 18 Visions. There's another band on there that I thought was pretty cool, and they didn't end up sticking around too long. Fuck, what was the name of that band? I don't know. They kind of had like a Glassjaw vibe, but I can't really remember. The singer went off and sang for Chiodos for a minute at one point.
Oh,
what was the name of that band?
I know the band you're talking about now too.
They were really good.
Because the singer was Brandon
something, yeah.
I'll look it up.
They were on that stage as well.
Yeah, I remember the band.
Yep, and the kid who's in Sleeping with Sirens, Nick Martin, was in a band before drugs. Undermined it. And
on Kung Fu Records.
Yeah, and their deal was they had to set up and tear down the stage. Like, they had to help build it. And I remember them, they were on that. And that's when we met Nick. And, you know, I hear from him every once in a while still to this day. You know, he's
a great dude. Yeah, I met him back then. It's a little convoluted, but my ex, who I have 2 kids with, and we're still, you know, we've been split up for about 5 years, but we're friendly and everything. Her brother-in-law is Joe Escalante, who owns Kung Fu Records and plays bass in the Vandals and whatnot. So around the time that Undermine was signed to Kung Fu, I was around that a lot, the Kung Fu bands and stuff like that. And then, it was awesome years later when it's funny you mentioned Chiodos, because I think I then met Nick on the Chiodos tour bus at Warped Tour again, like years later. He was right. I don't remember what he was doing with them, but he was with them like the last year, like the last big year that Chiodos played. And then of course, then he ended up in Sleeping, and great dude. Yeah,
he's a cool dude. He's a really nice guy. Wild little memory lane there, but
the winding pathway.
I remember the Bled would play right before, even though it was supposed to be random, it would always go to the Bled, then Underoath, and it would crush. It would literally and that's where we met those dudes, and we ended up taking them out on a small run at some point shortly after Warped Tour. And we stayed close with the Bled for a long time, and they went on to release some sick fucking albums. Man, that band was so cool.
And it was right in that same moment where Underoath was blowing up, was right around the time that they were hitting their stride.
Yeah.
And everything too. We should actually talk about, and we don't have to talk about it very long, but we should skip back and talk about the EP that you and Phil's band released, right? Because there was was there one official release?
Yeah, there was one official release, and then 2 one-off songs that was on a comp. I mean,
what was that experience like, being in a studio for the first time and making a record and knowing it, you know?
The funny thing is, it wasn't my first time. I had been in bands since I was 12 years old, you know, and there was a point in time when in North Carolina, my brother worked in a recording studio, and I got to work in the back packing boxes and they paid me under the table, and I got to do that. And me and my brother worked back there for next to nothing, just so we could use the studio. I think we got to use it like once every other month for like one night, and we would like track different stuff. And we tracked some demos and different stuff. It was a really nice studio, but it sounded like complete shit, everything we did, because we were kids and didn't know anything about anything.
But that's so cool that you got to mess around and record stuff before there was even a plan of releasing stuff.
Yeah, we were in a band. I was always been in different bands, but it's funny is that studio was more legit than the studio that this runs through released something on a signed label. That was just some dude's house, and we made it probably in like 3 days or something, if even.
Yeah,
I think we did all the drums and music in one day, and then all the vocals the next day, left. But yeah, I mean, that I vaguely remember that. It was very shitty, and like I think they gave us like Crystal Burger. We were starving, like we like had no money, and just try to make it as fast as we can so we could go play some shows and feed ourselves, because that's kind of how it was back then.
Isn't it funny that now a studio in some dude's house has a whole different connotation than it did back then?
Yeah.
Now it's now it could be like, Bob Rock's house or John Felton's house or something.
Yeah. For real. Yeah, it definitely wasn't a house like that. It was like a dark, moldy, like shit box in Valdosta, Georgia. It was bad.
So let's skip ahead then. After Chasing Safety into Define the Great Line, I feel like, I mean, it's serendipity maybe that it has the word define in there, because I feel like that, as much as Chasing Safety was the record that the band really became known on, I feel like Define is like the definitive. If someone were to ask me, hey, I've heard of that band Underoath, what do they sound like? Even now in 2020, that's probably the record I would go to and play some of it for them as an introduction. Talk to me a little bit about, now that lineup is solidified and you've been touring and you've got a record under your belt and things are moving upwards, and I assume there were probably at least a little bit more resources in terms of being able to spend a little more time and all that stuff. Tell me about sort of the differences there between what you were able to do the record before and then being able to really drill down on this one.
I think what happened is we made a record, right? Chasing Safety, and we were young. We were nobody. We were all pretty fresh with each other. We didn't know what we wanted. And I think by the time it came out, we hated most of it.
Mm-hmm.
And not saying it's not an important record for a lot of people, and we still play songs off of it. But I think it helped us decide what we didn't want. And I think that was the biggest thing, is people ask me about Define the Great Line all the time. Like, what was your mindset? Our mindset was we were hungry and angry at ourselves, I think, for making something that we were like, man, if only we, and I think it was just the motivation is that we knew what we didn't want, like we didn't want poppy bubblegum sounds. Like we wanted, we wanted to do something that we were like really proud of. And I think that was the only motivation, was like, I know I don't like this, and recording this way last time sucked. I hated this. I didn't like this vibe. I was uncomfortable the whole time. I didn't like that I was made to feel a certain way. Like, let's scratch all that. Like, we're good at what we do. Like, why did it get so weird in the studio with Safety? We didn't sound like that. And if you saw us on the early Chasing Safety, like, the way the record sounds and the way we were live did not line up. And I think every other record we've made, we sound just like the record, if not better live. We're a great live band. I think something always gets a little bit lost in the studio. And I think for sure Safety, when you saw us live, this was before we played to a click. and it was loud, and it was violent. We were bloody, diving off shit. It was like if Chasing Safety had met Dillinger Escape Plan, had sex, and had a baby. That's what the live show was like. So it was nothing like that record of this kind of like real, I don't know. It just like, we were just like, that's not, it didn't feel right. So we just went in going like, let's be what we are live.
Yeah.
And let's do that. The best that we can figure out how to do in the studio. And I think that was our only motivation, is that we wanted to be who we were on stage, not who we were in the studio.
Yeah, and you know what I remember at the time, I think Timmy was the person in the band that I was in most regular contact with back then, and I do remember that now that you bring it up. The feeling of there were some softened edges on Chasing Safety that you guys didn't feel represented what the band really was,
right? Yeah,
and that people were maybe getting attached to, you know, a couple little flourishes about that record that aren't indicative of the overall whole. People were kind of getting attached to the wrong parts of the band, and so this record was more like, no, we're gonna like make it clear what the band is, like it or not, you know.
And I don't think there was a whole lot of thought into it either. And I think, like, you know, some of my favorite bands, look at the, not comparing ourselves to the Beatles at all, but one of the first bands I was shown as a kid, like almost every, there's definitely sections where it completely changes from night and day. You know, Sergeant.
It's crazy to think what a short time period that was too.
Yeah, I think that's what being an artist is, though. That freedom. And before the internet, when everyone could have said, "Fuck you guys, this sucks, I hate it. What happened? I want to hold your hand," or whatever people would have said.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think that was the freedom that we had at that point, because there wasn't an Instagram and a YouTube to read all the comments, so where people are angry no matter if you sound the same or if you sound different. They're angry no matter what you do. It seems like these days.
Well, and those are the people you're going to hear from. I'm often reminding everyone I know who's in a band that
it's not the people that love it.
People that they're, you know, Lambgoat was always my barometer. When the Lambgoat used to show you the views for each story, and I would say like, hey, this has 400, you know, terrible comments saying that, you know, 40 usually. It was like, it's 40 comments saying, I hope your van flips over. But this has 40,000 views. So that means out of 40,000 people,
40 people,
only 40 of them. The rest of them were like, oh, cool, tour dates. When's Underoath coming to town? All right, click, click.
It's always the angry people that are the loudest, I feel like. But anyways, I think there was some sort of like just freedom and like, we're going to make stuff that makes us happy. All the way up until this day, I think we've done that. You know, I think even with our newest record, Erase Me, is like when we decided we're going to make a record, we were like, let's leave everything else behind. Like, what do you want to hear? Like, that's what we always did, is like, I want to make something I want to listen to as far as this genre goes, like as far as heavy music goes. And even up to our latest record, we're like, I don't care what we've done. I don't care who we are. Like, we're not going to make something we don't want to hear or want to play. So you just kind of, everything you've done, you kind of just block it off and just go, who are we now? Things change, you know, and you know, and Underoath is never going to make a country record or a soft pop record, because it's not who we are. It's the six of us in a room. When we get together, it's always going to be, there's going to be some anger and some violence in the music and aggression, and just, that's what it's going to be. But it's always going to be different, because I think it's about where you are at that point in time. And I think Chasing Safety, we were really like, that doesn't feel like us. You know, it didn't feel like us. So we were really adamant about just making something that made us happy. And I think we did that with the Find the Great Line.
Absolutely. And it comes across in the record itself. And I think you touched upon something that I think is super important, and I hear myself saying in conversation a lot. That's the key, is to make the record that you want to hear, that you yourself want to listen to make the movie you want to watch, to make the podcast you want to subscribe to write the comic book that you want to read. Whatever it is creatively, I think that's where the best art comes from, especially if you see there's a void, right? Where you're like, man, I really love this band and I really love this band. I wish somebody would take this part of that and this part of that and put it here, but then add this. And it's like, that's where great stuff comes from, is that need of like, I want to hear this. I'll just make it.
And I mean, so my favorite bands, like records are kind of all over the place. Look at Radiohead, you know, the records are all over the place. Deftones even. I have the Deftones conversation all the time. Like I feel like certain Deftones fans love these records and hate these and vice versa. And it's like, but it's always the Deftones that are always going to do what they want to do. And it's always awesome. It's like, but there are certain different people that like certain styles of records better in their catalog. Same with 9 Inch Nails. Like they have the really aggressive rock, like loud ones, and the very electronic ones. You never know what you're going to get. But just because if you're like me that likes the more rock side of 9 Inch Nails and they release a super electronic record, I'm not going, fuck this, I'm not going to go to their show.
Right.
I'm like, this is awesome. But I hopefully they'll do another record that's got some drums and loud guitars on it again. And then they do. But I'm still at the show no matter what, because I'm a fan, you know, like, and I always remind that with people, like, those old records always exist and people are always going to play those songs and they're always going to be evolving. Like if I got 5, you know, okay computers, I would have given up a long time ago. You know, like I didn't want that. And I think you want that, but you don't, you know? Exactly.
And then when you get it, you complain that it's not evolving and it just sounds the same as the last one.
Yeah. Well,
you know, so
it does. It sounds like when bands try to recreate what they've done, to me, it just sounds like B-sides of shit that we loved. Like, we never tried to recreate Define the Great Line, especially as we got back together. It's like, we're not, you know, in our early 30s going to go back and pretend to be who we were in our early 20s. We've learned a lot. We've gotten a lot better. We've gotten better as people. We've gotten better as songwriters. We've gotten better as just, you know, human beings and just being us. So, like, why would we throw all that shit out the door to be who we used to be? And I think that's where a lot of people, in my mind, make a mistake, is going back to like, oh, you know, like this was a thing, let's do this again.
Like, and I think Underoath has probably benefited too from having the opportunity for everyone to explore other things creatively in other contexts and other projects, because now it's not 6 people trying to cram every single thing they've ever wanted to do into their one band. You can now come back to Underoath and add a little bit of your individual flavor from those other experiences, but also have more of a purity about what this combination of the 6.
I think the funny thing about being a songwriter is, like, especially in a band like Underoath, is the world knows me for Underoath, and unless you really know me, like, it's funny because I write so much music and the world has probably heard 5% of it, and the 5% that I write is Underoath. Like, and I'm writing for Underoath all the time, but like what you just said, like, I have so many other outlets. Maybe the one day they'll come out, maybe they won't, who knows, but I have different outlets to where, like, I don't just listen to that. And I love all sorts of different kinds of music, and I don't try to cram it all into Underoath. Like, I've got other outlets to where, and I write for some other artists, you know, I've worked with some DJs, I've done all sorts of different shit, especially during quarantine, and, like, I'm not trying to cram that stuff into this band. Like, when I want to make aggressive music, that's why Sleepwave doesn't exist anymore. It's because when Underoath was gone, there was a void I needed to fill. And I had all this music that was more like old Coldplay, Radiohead, like that kind of shit that I love. But I was like, no, I still need this. I need this, like, aggressive live outlet for me. So when Sleepwave started to sizzle out, and I was just alone doing it, and it was never a solo project, it was a duo, and we had a live band, and then it became more just me writing for the second record alone as Underoath was picking back up. And so it just kind of fizzled out because,
like, naturally
because I don't need 2 outlets to do that. I need all this other stuff to do something else with. And the more I do that, if those songs come out, you know, I've worked on many records that maybe just wasn't the right time, or I decided not to put it out or whatever. But I've got a lot of places to where I can make music to where I'm doing something for myself that allows me to focus what's right for Underoath over here. You know, like what you said, I'm not trying to cram it all. Like, I make music every day, you know, like, it's just what I've always done since I was a little kid, like 12 years old, playing guitar, writing songs, you know. And I think, that's a helpful thing for me. And I think for a lot of the guys, like Aaron having the Almost, and Tim has other outlets, and I have other outlets. Chris has other outlets, and myself and Aaron and Tim and Chris are the main songwriters, as far as Underoath goes. And we all have other things that we use our songwriting for. So I think it maybe keeps the palette pretty clean.
Absolutely. One last thing I want to talk about before we move on altogether from Define. It can't be overstated, in my opinion anyway, chart positions and gold records and all of that. But that Underoath record debuting at number 2 on Billboard was massive, not only for the band, but for the entire scene. I mean, I think now, the way everything has changed, the way the scene obviously grew, but also, the way that people consume music has changed and how the charts have adjusted. It's a lot more common now for sort of bands that are in our orbit for us to hear about them getting big chart positions and whatever. But that was a time when you needed to sell a lot of compact discs and iTunes downloads to chart at all. I mean, literally to even break into the 200. And I can still sort of vividly remember that moment, even just in our little corner of the industry, of that record having a massive debut.
Yeah, the funny thing is, like, I was never business savvy, especially in my younger years, for anything in the industry. Every band I had been in before, I was always, writing and concentrating on that. I never booked a show. My brother always did that. I never spoke to a manager at the time. My brother did that, and then Tim was the guy that did all that at the beginning. Like there was, so I was always focused on the live show and writing, and I didn't know how big that was. I didn't understand. I was still, obviously, I think how young I was, but I remember walking outside the bus on Warped Tour and calling my brother and being like, is 98,000 copies a lot? Like, because everyone's like congratulating us, and the guy seemed like, and I was like, is that good? Like, is that, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not playing stupid right now. Like, I swear you can call Phil, my brother, and ask him, and he'll tell you about that conversation we had. Like, I didn't know that was a big deal. Just because the world we came from, like, I didn't expect it. I didn't even know how much Chasing Safety had sold at the time. I just knew we were working our asses off, and I think we had started selling out venues, but they weren't like huge yet. They were just like cool, smaller venues, and we were just working really hard. I didn't think that was something that was going to happen or expect it. And I think that's different now too. I think a lot of people they want to project numbers, and they're, trying to get their streams up and trying to, and this, that, and the other. And like, you hear about people posting.
We bundle it this way, and if we do it that way, maybe we get, everyone's trying to wait there for you can.
Yeah. It seems like a really important thing for a lot of people and I'm just kind of like, I mean, I'm very proud of it. And, I just didn't know, I wasn't focused on that. And I think,
which was probably better for you artistically and personally.
Yeah. And honestly, like, even today, I feel like there's a lot of danger in the numbers game. And like, I don't know. I see, like, I want to see people in the room singing along and feeling the way I feel about the music. If the venue's full and it's live and fucking people are going up, like, I always felt like that was the success. I remember thinking at one point, if I could hear people singing my words back at me, I've made it. And that happened on an off-day show on the 2004 Warped Tour when after Safety had come out, we had played. And I remember, the guys remember Alley Cats in Virginia, but I remember the Auto Bar in Baltimore, which is a tiny 230 cap room, and you're right on top of people. And we opened up we didn't take any days off on that Warped Tour because we couldn't afford to. So we played off-day shows in little venues, and I remember opening it with the blue note that goes into Dangerous Business and the countdown, and I could hear people counting it down. And I was like, what? And then we started, and I started singing, and I couldn't hear my vocals because the crowd was so loud. And I turned back to Aaron, and I was like, fuck, like, this is it. Like, that was my bar of success. I was like, oh my God, they're singing. Oh my God, they're shouting the words. They're like, the whole place was singing every word. And I was like, well, we made it. And then everything after that was just hard. I was like, oh, now we're just doing hard work. And like, you know, we're just going to keep touring and keep making music. And that I didn't really even realize what the number 2 meant. So yeah, that was that was really awesome. And I remember it being a big deal. And now I know what it means, obviously, like, and it's fucking cool. But yeah, to me, numbers are still a thing that like, if the bodies aren't in the room, like, I don't care if you got 4 million followers on Instagram, if you got 50 people watching you play live, I just don't understand it. It's like, I don't get it. Like, you know, it's just not really, it's about what I'm like getting in real life, which is funny.
In the moment, that exchange of energy. Yeah. You can't get that.
Which is funny. And as we're saying this, talking over the internet, but I've always kind of steered clear of a lot of that.
For sure.
So
you have.
Maybe that.
You know, this gets into something, a great segue into Lost in the Sound of Separation, because one of the things that I find most impressive about that record in that era, retroactively, but also at the time, because I remember, you know, we have a lot of mutual friends and relationships in terms of your management and the record label especially. And that was a moment where, coming off the success of the 2 prior albums, you would certainly have been forgiven for pivoting into a more commercial zone, right? Of being like, okay, it's getting bigger and bigger. And that tends to be what a lot of bands do in that moment, you know, and trying to do like radio hits and shorter songs and whatever. And I remember at the time just being like, man, these dudes are, they have every opportunity to be some huge screamo band, and they're making like a Hydra Head record.
Yeah.
Know, like,
but that's what we
I remember
were.
at the time just being like, wow, like it's punk, you know, it's ballsy.
But that's what we were into. And I don't think we were trying to be ballsy. I just think, like, honestly, at that time, as far as heavy music went, you know, granted, it's like I'm still listening to Coldplay in my iPod riding down the highway. But like, as far as heavy music went, you know, like, we were huge Botch fans and ISIS fans and Converge and Old Man Gloom and all that cool. They get a lot of that Hydra Head shit. Like, and I think some of that did influence us heavily enough to continue down that, you know, we all have different musical tastes, but we all had a couple of things in common that we loved, you know, be it Jimmy Eat World and down to, you know, ISIS and, you know, which is a name you can't say now, but you know,
not a hoodie you want to wear.
Yeah. But we all did agree on those bands, and like Radiohead, and like we, I don't think we even thought of anything about what a big screamo success could be, because to us, we were still underground. We didn't think there was such a thing as mainstream success. We didn't think, even if there was, and I'm not shit talking, I think we could all agree here, even if I put the record label on the spot here, is I don't think any of us thought that was a possibility. From if you were on Tooth and Nail and you were a band that was heavy, you know, like back then. Like, I just don't think that was a thought process of like, we didn't go in thinking like, let's not make a commercial sounding record or let's make a commercial sounding record. I think we just rolled in off of 2 years of touring and go, what's next? Let's make music that we really want to hear.
And that's what I think is so great about the purity of it, and about a lot of the bands that I love and the ones that stand the test of time, because I think that the band could have pivoted then to the direction of like, you know, and these are great bands, but just in terms of the difference stylistically, you could have pivoted to like The Used or My Chem, or, you know, and certainly that was a moment where Avenged and Fall Out Boy and all these bands that had come from similar backgrounds were on TRL, right, and like really blowing up. And I thought it was cool that you took the true to yourselves, double down on what you are instead of, over that. And I think it's helped in terms of longevity,
Yeah, and I think looking back on it, it makes us seem like we're really cool, but we're not. Like, we weren't thinking of that. We weren't trying to like prove a point and be punk rock. Like, I just think it was just like, yeah, 2 years of touring to find the great line. Like, what's next? Our natural evolution was like more art, like expressing ourselves more artistically, and we just thought that's what we wanted to do at the time, and we did. We didn't even think twice about it, Like, I think now there's a lot more thinking, and people are a lot more connected, and it's a lot easier to get a lot of music. Like, back then, you had to go vinyl hunting to get some of the bands we just spoke about, know, and like catching them at a live show was almost like a private event, and you felt fucking cool, like, damn, I just fucking saw Old Man Gloom. That doesn't happen very often. Which it didn't, it's cool. Like, Caven knows who we are. Like that, and like we were bigger maybe at the time, but we didn't think like that. We were still just like, I think the thing about Underoath is we've always been, we're like fans, like we're fans. Like, even of bands, like, I fucking will never forget Poison the Well on the first Define the Great Line tour playing before us, and me just every night spent, no, like, this doesn't make any sense. and even the Poison the Well dudes, like, you guys are way bigger than us. I'm like, no, we're not. Like, me and my friends grew up. I was like listening to you and going to your shows. I was in the front row before I was even in Underoath. Like, no, this is backwards. And it wasn't being humble. It just didn't make sense to me. And it wasn't an iPhone in your back pocket where you're scrolling and seeing how popular you are all the time. It was just, we were just going, and I was like, wait, so the Poison the Well tour is like them playing before us? Like, that's like one of my favorite heavy bands. Opposite December was like, that's like the first time I was like, oh, wow, like screaming over like some melodic guitar. I was like, whoa, I was always a singer. I always sang. I didn't scream until I got pushed into metal bands, and I was singing, and they're like, no, you got to do this. And I was like, oh, I'll figure it out, I guess. Like, and Poison the Well was one of the first bands that I heard do that, and I was like,
Jeffrey, dude. The beast. And this takes us nicely into the Disambiguation record, which I remember came out a couple days after my birthday that year, which was fascinating to people watching this. But it seems like you continued down. Like, I feel like that trio of records works almost as a nice trilogy of sorts. There's a stylistic thread that runs through them. Before we talk about the music on that record, tell me about that symbol, because that's when that definitive O started showing up in the Underoath word, and not that there has to be some kind of deep esoteric meaning to it.
It was just a marketing thing that From Tooth and Nail came up with, and it actually had been around since Chasing Safety. It just started getting used more regularly. It was always on our merch, and it was cool. Like, I thought it was awesome. Like, I'm not a marketing guy or like a digital design type of person, but I think every band has a cool logo at some point, and I thought that was so cool that we had one, it just worked. And I, I've got one on me. Most of the guys in the band have tattoos, have one on them somewhere,
I love when bands have a definitive symbol, and it works that, you enunciate the letter O when you say the word Underoath. So even though U is the natural, it's like, I don't know, there's just something really cool about how that developed.
Yeah, dude, that was, I don't remember the guy at Tooth and Nail who pinned that, but I remember it being really cool. And
if I had to guess, it was probably either Jordan Butcher or Ryan Clark.
Yes.
It would have been one of those two. I'll ask one of them.
So, yeah,
but it's pretty badass.
Either way, it was a, kind of that keep it simple, stupid thing. Like, there's nothing to it, but it's powerful because it's simple and it makes sense.
So the record before was Matt Goldman, and then also Adam D from Killswitch, and I think David Bendeth maybe mixed the record before.
David Bendeth did mix Lost sound. Yes.
Okay, yeah, and then so this one, it was just Matt Goldman producing, and a different.
And Jeremy Griffith was also co-producing.
Oh, okay. I don't know much about Jeremy Griffith. So what was the?
He's a badass, man. He actually did the first couple of Sleepwave demos that no one ever heard that were better than anything that came out on Broken Compass, in my opinion, before it got like annihilated by a million different hands. But Jeremy he did I know at least one or two Norma Jean records that were phenomenal sounding, and a bunch of other cool stuff that now that I'm on the spot, I can't think of any of it. But Jeremy was great. I worked with him. We sang every day, like constantly. And this was like getting to be a peak of a really bad drug. Like I used to do drugs like at home, and then I started doing drugs on tour. Never before I played, it was always after. And then it started becoming home and on tour, but not in the studio. But then on this record, it was home and on tour and in the studio.
Yeah.
And I was like recovering for the first half of the day, and then I would get up and then sing for 6 hours a day. And we would demo all the vocals out while they would work on music in one room, and me and Jeremy would demo it all out, and then they would work on music more, and then when the music was finalized, then I would re-sing it all. So some of those songs I did like 6 and 7 different choruses for, and I just worked really hard. And it was weird because I was in a really dark spot and like falling apart, I guess, but at the same time, like working my ass off, and I listened.
It makes a certain kind of twisted sense though, because it's like you have the one thing
that's keeping you alive,
all cylinders, and then everything else. It makes a twisted sense.
Yeah, and I look back. I haven't listened to that record in a long time. We did a listen through on Twitch for some fans the other day.
Yeah,
there's some songs on there that I'm not really into, but overall, I think the record's really cool. And I was like, I'm proud of the vocal work on that record. Is like, I busted my ass, and I think you can tell on that album.
Now, so the dual producer thing then, was that more split up between like one producer did the music and one did vocals with you, or?
No, it's normally like it's a little bit of Define the Great Line was Matt Goldman and Adam D. Lost in the Sound was Matt Goldman and Adam D. And then Disambiguation was Jeremy Griffith and Matt Goldman. It's just there's 6 of us, and I think we had
right. That makes sense.
And I think having 2 rooms, like Chris would work with Jeremy as well. Like we just had to have 2 rooms going because the budgets, we didn't have major label budgets, so we had to have 2 rooms going, constantly firing at both times to finish an album in the time that we had with the money that we had. So even though with all the success Underoath had, we never really had that huge budget to just do whatever the fuck we wanted, So I think we always had, an A room and a B room firing on all cylinders. Chris would work every morning from lunch till 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and the second 5 o'clock rolls around, we take a dinner break, and then I would come in and work from 6:30 or 7 until 1 or 2 in the morning or whatever, and the other room would be like drums and bass, and then bass and guitar, whatever. We were just nonstop.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we did for 3 records because we had to.
Yeah, I mean, necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Yeah.
The beauty of limited resources, what it can produce. Even I always make the example of what John Carpenter was able to do with the original Halloween in a couple of weeks with no money, compared to the successive Halloween remake with millions of dollars. And somehow it's like that first cheap one, and it's like, how much did the limited resources help make it great?
Some of my my parents, my dad especially, and was Beatles and Zeppelin and the Stones and Pink Floyd and the Doors and all that stuff. I was had to listen to, and if I wanted to learn guitar, I had to learn all the scales first, and then I had to learn Led Zeppelin's and that kind of stuff.
Nice.
Was forced on me. But the first shit that we got into outside of our parents' influence was the grunge era, like Nirvana and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains and all that Stone Temple Pilots, all that shit. And a lot of those records, some of those records were made in like 7 days, 5 days. Like some of the best records still that I go back and listen to when I want to listen to like rock. Some of those records were made with no money, no time.
And live in the room.
And
You know?
awesome. And it's awesome. There's something about that.
Yeah.
Overthinking can kill, I think, the best songs, you know.
I call it analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
You've analyzed something to the point that you become frozen. We're near the finish line, by the way.
That's a great band name, analysis paralysis.
It would be great. It's got a nice little iambic pentameter. So this was obviously the first record without Aaron and the first record with Daniel. And I phrase it that way because I think those are two separate thoughts, you know?
Yeah.
It had to be weird to make a record without Aaron, but at the same time, you're making a record with a totally different person who's bringing, you know, what he brings to the table. It's funny. I've actually always wanted to ask you this. It probably would have been off the record at any point before now, but it's been so long that I don't think it matters. When Aaron left, and this isn't based on any conversations I ever had with Phil or anything, but just in the back of my mind, I always thought Phil would end up in Underoath if Aaron were
right.
Why didn't that happen?
I just don't think. I don't know. It just like. I think Tim, for example, just said like, let's not even go there. You know, like, I think there was something about. I don't know. I remember Tim just being like, when we first started talking about drummers, he was just like, shouldn't even go there. You know, don't mix if this doesn't end well. What if we bring him around to try out and it doesn't work out, you know, like, or we try out 4 other people and someone else fits better, you know? And I've always been the oddball in Underoath. As far as, you know, most things. And I don't think he would have vibed well with those guys either. Because it's hard for me at times. Like, I've learned because I grew up with them and we all have our special moments in relationships, but I'm, you know, even a lot different than Phil, and I don't think Phil maybe would have fit in. And I think Tim maybe was. I thought of it kind of as a disrespectful, but I think he was looking out for me.
Yeah, I can see both sides of that too, especially now. And that's why it's good to talk about it now with all the hindsight. Yeah, I could see it upsetting I mean, as much as bringing in anyone new would, but especially given the blood relation.
Yeah, I think
upsetting sort of the chemistry of.
I think it would have affected me and my brother's relationship if it didn't work out. And then, obviously,
that's not worth trading in a million.
Yeah,
ask the Kinks or the Oasis or the Black Crowes.
Yeah, and then like
it's not worth the bad.
Yeah, and I think that was Tim seeing things clearer than I did at that time about a situation like that. And I wasn't upset. I was just like, well, the band was really at a rift anyway before all that. And I was like, Of course, the motherfucker wouldn't want another version of similar to me around because we don't get along anyway. So,
yeah.
And I was like, all right, you know, I think some people in my family were confused, but I was like, at the same time, they weren't. They get it. You know, I think they've been around those guys enough to know that. Yeah. You know, I think, like you said, in hindsight, I think it was good because if, for example, it didn't, you know, they didn't vibe well with certain people, or it just, you know, the way those guys play and the way he plays doesn't line up better than someone else, it would have been a really shitty situation, you know?
Yeah. I mean, even if it wasn't bad for your relationship with your brother, then even whatever resentments might linger within the band on your part.
Yeah.
The rest of the guys aren't fair to him, or, you know, that makes total sense. I was just always curious because it seems like a no-brainer until you start thinking about it, and then it's not.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. Yeah. I remember around that time too, or a couple of years before, when I first was getting to know your brother, how many times at a show, especially, like, someone would stop him thinking he was you.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, you're the singer from Underoath, right? And I would always hear him very calmly go like, nope, that's my brother though. He's my brother. So yeah, that probably would have been a confusing band photo for some people. But it was pre-blonde hair, pre-mustache on your brother. So
Yeah.
this takes us into, we've got just a couple more records to go. I want to talk, you mentioned Broken Compass. I want to talk about that since it's Spencer Chamberlain deep dive on your discography and not just Underoath.
Right, yeah.
Obviously, I was in contact with you around that time. I did the bio for the record, so I have some familiarity with what was happening. But I remember a lot of the press at the time focusing somewhat on, I remember there was an anecdote somewhere that was, you had 2 gold records on your wall that you were counting out pocket change to, buy a burrito or whatever. And that was that was kind of where things were as Sleepwave was coming together. Let's talk a little bit about that.
I mean, there was a long time in between, and I think me and my buddy Steven had been working on music and we were having fun doing it. I just think it went through way too much before it took off. Like, you would have thought we could have just picked up and gone, but like there were so many different labels and different demos and different people, and it just was a great learning process. I look at it as that. And I think it was great to get out there and start at the bottom again. It could have taken a different direction, a different form. And we always joked about, like, we could just make a medical record and just be fucking big and keep going. But we didn't want to do that, and we just wanted to, some of that stuff was stuff I was working on the side. Like I told you, I'm always writing music, and some of it was already working on it when I was doing Disambiguation, just like different, it wasn't so aggressive, but, and I think it just took us a long time to get off of our feet, and we sank, myself and Steven both sank all of our personal money into it, trying to get it off the ground. And I think that's where the anonymity came from, where we're like counting pocket change at the time, because before we started touring, me and him had both dumped so much money into gear and recording. We were paying for our own demos. Like, labels would come down, like Atlantic would come down and watch us play, and this is great, and draw up a contract and then disappear, and then like we're stuck, like confused, and all this different stuff was supposed to happen, and we were just spending a lot of money, just paying our bills and our mortgages. He had a house and I had a house, and we were getting a live band together and buying the gear for it and buying vans and buying trailers, and like when you don't have a label doing that, it gets to be really expensive. And then touring was just a different time. It was right before the shift of like a lot of bands kind of doing the more aggressive songs that are mostly singing. Like, the scene wasn't there yet. I don't think there was, that yet. It was just a little too early, and we got stuck touring with a lot of bands that were bands that wanted to tour with Underoath, and I don't think we got, it was just tough. And the minute the record came out, we couldn't land a tour that we could afford to do.
That's the other thing about starting from the bottom, and with you come from having the overhead of a really established musician, but then getting the resources on the road of a bunch of 19-year-olds, and 19-year-olds don't have mortgages. And
it was tough. It was really tough. And we did a lot of great tours. We went around the world. We played Wembley with Bring Me the Horizon and Soundgarden in Australia, and we did a lot of cool shit. And
I saw you at the Palladium, and I actually don't remember who you were on tour with, because I remember
Taking Back Sunday.
Oh, okay, that's what that was.
Yeah. I think the next record would have been great. It was the same thing. It was a chasing safety thing. Like, we got in, we thought, it didn't sound like what we sounded like after it was done, and the songs kind of changed a little bit, and we were, it was the first time we'd ever been in that kind of situation where there was a lot on the line. And I think the unreleased Sleepwave material that I have on my hard drive is the best Sleepwave material. And it was really like, we figured it out, what we wanted to do, and we would get these tours, and we'd go on tour and barely make enough. And in between tours, me and Steven wouldn't go home. We parked at Matt Goldman's, and we were actually working with Matt Goldman on some really fucking cool shit. And then it just, like, between the drugs and the alcohol, and I think getting on tour with a bunch of guys, we hired a bunch of friends. And it's like in Underoath, I was always the wild guy. And then going on tour with a bunch of people that like, oh, there's no one to hide stuff from.
Yeah.
Not like it's good to hide things, but like there was
Yeah.
no, I was like, man, I'm like the most tame out of all these people. And it was destructive and negative. And from the crew, like, because even our friends, even the crew was our friends because we couldn't afford a lot. So it was like pretty poisonous, I think, even though we thought we were having a good time. Like, it was pretty brutal. And I remember times being like deathly hungover until like the first note of the song, like shaking, thinking I can't play, like it was just survival. And it was dirty rock and roll lifestyle of just stringing it together, and I think what was going to come next would have been awesome. And it just fell apart. It was just like, it was too destructive, I think, for me. I think I was, when the Underoath thing came back, I think it saved my life in a way. It like was a crutch for me to be able to get off all the drugs and have people around that I always looked at as like not like the people I would hang out with at home as much, and like I have to keep myself in check, but I needed that, And I think with Sleepwave, it just, I think I needed that kind of structure of like some super uptight Christian dudes to be around when I was going through some of that stuff. And I think, in hindsight, I look back at, we're all men now, and even the guys that were doing the Sleepwave stuff are in better places now. But it was just a weird time, I think, and it was, timing sucked. And when the record came out, we sat still for like months on end. Like, we had a song on the radio and we couldn't tour because we couldn't land the tour. The tours we did land, we couldn't afford to do. And it was just like, like fall, like you missed the first stair and you fall down the whole staircase kind of vibe, and I think, yeah, like I said, I think the shit on my hard drive is the best that no one ever got to hear. And I think about it all the time. Sometimes I'll be like, I don't have a big online following because I don't really use Instagram or Twitter, and I never had a Facebook. But I always think about like, man, what if I just put those album 2 stuff up just for people to have, just because it was rad, and I don't think anyone will ever hear it.
And that would be the moment in the quarantine era.
I know, and I don't know if I legally am allowed to do anything.
There's that.
I'm sure I'll get in trouble somewhere. Any good idea I have, but yeah, that just kind of, but man, we were really good live though. Like we figured it out.
I have no reason to bullshit you, especially now that you're back in Underoath.
Yeah.
But you were. That show that I only saw you the one time, but it was visceral, and all of that sort of danger that you described that was going on behind the scenes, as unhealthy as it is, it was also one of those things that you could see was fueling that performance.
Yeah, we were
had an edge to it that was exciting.
Dude, and I remember one of my dear friends, Greg, you had mentioned Dillinger Escape Plan before. He came to the San Francisco show, and we had built our own lights, kind of a local band move, but we just didn't want to play with like house lights on, and we ran it by every band that we toured with, and like we played to a click, so we ran the lights off of our Ableton ourselves, and they were just analog, like what we loved, like yellow analog shit. And like I remember Greg coming up and he's just like, dude, it's like you guys are a headlining band that no one's ever heard of. And I remember him saying that to me, and he's like, it's so fucking good. Like, you guys should be doing your own headlining shows. And I'm like, yeah, but every time we try, it's like, it's not full. It's not great. It's like, it was on the cusp of being something cool, I think. And I think we needed another record to get there. But I think it was just timing. It has a way of working itself out. It was I don't think we could have kept living that way. I don't think, it was getting weird and people were fighting a lot. And I think a lot of that had to do with all the substances being used. And, dudes ended up some of the guys ended up in rehab for a year after all that stuff, and like completely different life now. So it's all for the better, I think.
Yeah, and there's some great balance, I think, because in hearing and listening to you right now, I'm thinking about how, you come out of one situation where, and perhaps understandably, you had some, man, I wish everyone wasn't so uptight and that people could loosen up and, we could party a little bit and this wouldn't be such a big deal. And then you get in another situation where you're like, man, I wish somebody was in control right now.
Which is
insane. Like,
exactly
where's the adult in the room? And it's like,
exactly.
Having lived through both experiences, I would imagine that brings you to a place of balance where you can.
Oh, it's very balanced.
Of all of it,
Yeah, it's very, and like Underoath has a great time. Those guys are obviously completely different than they were back in the day too.
Right.
They're all, married with kids and way less uptight, and they enjoy some drinking and hanging out and having a good time. And it's definitely responsible human beings being responsible human beings, but still having a good time. And
balance.
Balance is a great thing that is overlooked a lot.
That's
in our job.
That's what the Star Wars trilogy was supposed to be all about. Bring balance to the Force. Okay, so that brings us to Erase Me, which is then all these other moments in your life and career and how they're so intertwined. That's another thing about this genre. And it's interesting. And I think, this being kind of the pilot, like the first deep dive episode I've done with really great bands, I think this intertwining of the personal and the musical is inescapable. Like, you can't talk about career moments without talking about what's going on in your life, because those records at their best are a reflection of who you were and who you are,
Exactly.
So Erase and being, go ahead.
And I think that's exactly why I had such a hard time with Underoath when we broke up, is because there's a bit of identity crisis, because you are those albums. Like, those Underoath albums were me and Aaron, like, that's being the mouthpiece of a band is like very personal. And then that's all of a sudden stopped and taken away from you. It's like 5 minutes ago, while I was on that stage, I was the guy from Underoath, and walking off, I wasn't. I was just a dude that put out songs at one point, and I wanted to keep making music, and they didn't. And I dedicated most of my life at that point to these guys, and I was just like fucking confused, and like I felt fucked. I was like, man, I am screwed. That was the one time I was like, I should have listened to my dad and gone to college instead. Like, it was that moment, and I was like, fuck. And I think that's exactly what it is with this kind of music, is you are, maybe not every band, but at least I know us and a lot of our friends, it's like you are singing about personal experiences, and it's very personal, and it's painting a picture of your life, and that it's exactly what you're going through at that time, and that's what it is. And leading up to Erase Me is like, it's those moments like Aaron going through divorce and me getting off drugs and the band getting back together and dealing with all those different feelings, and that is that record, in like a nutshell. It's everything I could have. It was better than anything I could imagine it would have been at that time. Like, I listened to that record the other day in the gym. This was before the quarantine, obviously, and I hadn't listened to it a long time. I was like, I still wouldn't change a thing on it for what we did. I was like, it's exactly what we wanted. We sat down and said, the word "not Underoath enough" doesn't exist. So when you listen to heavy music, what the fuck do you want to hear? When you're driving down the highway and you want to put on a heavy record, that's what this has got to be. And we didn't leave until that's what it was. And yeah, it's like, it sounds selfish to say, but it should be your favorite heavy record. If you're making a heavy record, it should be your favorite one, or you shouldn't put it out.
And would you say this is the first record that you've made that you wouldn't change a thing on?
I don't think I would really change any of them, even though I look back and there's things I regret on all of them. And I think that's what fires you to do more. But I think, it's only been 2 years. So right now I'm like, no, that record's great for exactly what it was. Right. In the time that it came out and where we were as people. And I think the next one will be completely different. And I think Underoath will always do that. I think I want to compare it to the 9 Inch Nails vibe of like, you never know what you're going to get, but you're still going to love 9 Inch Nails, Yeah. And that's what I hope for Underoath fans. But I don't think it'll be Erase Me Part 2. And I love that record. And then listening to Disambiguation the first time the other day, minus one song, I'm like, I fucking love that record. I listened to it, I was like, fuck, this is awesome. You know, because at that time we thought that was exactly what we wanted to do, and it was. And that's why when I go back and hear these records, besides they're only chasing safety, I feel like all of them, I'm like, at that time, that's exactly what we wanted to do, and it's perfect for that time in our life.
That's the best possible outcome any artist could have.
And I'm not saying our records are perfect.
I know exactly what you mean.
I'm not being cocky.
The records aren't perfect. They're a perfect representation of
where we were. The perfect representation of where we were at that time. And I think it's going to be completely different on the next one. You know, I can tell. You know.
Well, dude, that's a perfect place to wrap up. We just hit it. Not only did we get to the last record, but we got to a nice summary of.
Yeah. And just, I guess the main thing is you never know what to expect from Underoath, because I sure as hell don't.